glare. A razor wire, it's a scary game. A razor wire's game.
So there you go. It is September 1st. Welcome to Let's Talk Native on the LTN Radio Network. This program breaks all the rules for Native radio. No buffalo speeches, no mystic healing, no special Indian prayers. We tackle the real issues facing Native people with a look back at our glorious and our grave history, a tough look at where we're at now, and look forward to our ongoing battles for sovereignty and autonomy. Let's Talk Native is produced in association with Iroquois Promotions on the LTN Radio Network, streaming live from the Cattaraugus territory of the Seneca Nation, and simulcast or rebroadcast by the Gwe, CKWE in Tandanega. We also are rebroadcast on Netroots Radio, Real People's Media, and Indigenous Resistance Radio. And I thank all of those networks for carrying this program. We do broadcast from the Seneca Nation here on the Cattaraugus territory, from our own studios here at LTN Radio, at the LTN Radio Network. We are streaming live on Facebook this evening, as we normally do each show, but we also, and that's audio and video, obviously, but we also stream live the audio on www.ltnradionet.com. So if you are just want to listen, you can pull it up on your cell phone, or on your smartphone, on your computer, on your tablet, or you can, like I said, go to Facebook, and there on Facebook you can we look for your comments as well. I am John Kane. I am your show's host and producer, and I'm in studio with Jake Proud, who's running the cameras for both our Facebook live stream and for capturing our video for our YouTube channel, which is Let's Talk Native TV. I encourage you to not only check out our YouTube channel, but subscribe to our YouTube channel. We'd like to get those numbers up and start to get some of these videos shared through broader networks. I encourage anybody to share the Facebook stream or the YouTube version of our show. You can tweet it out. You can share it on Facebook, and I appreciate any of those who do that. Obviously, I share some of the links afterwards. And my wife, I give my thanks to Brenda for sharing the Facebook live stream to various group pages, and that's the way we get the word out, get the voice out, get the perspective out that has sorely missed it. And we're going to talk about that issue tonight. Our studio engineer is Kelly McMillan. She provided our setup here and got us going, and I appreciate the good work that she has done giving us our studio setup that we have here. So let me kind of get right into it. I've talked about missing and murdered Indigenous women on the program before, and it is such a grossly overlooked issue, and the problem with it being so grossly overlooked is that it ends up creating a level of acceptability and the violence that our women face, domestic violence in some cases, but oftentimes it is not domestic violence. It is the violence in some of the outlying areas of our territories, what they call the Highway of Tears in Canada. A lot of times it's associated with the extraction industries and literally the man camps that have been established because of these things. But there's also, and I've talked about this before, there's like this unique racism that is, that people in general, but certainly, again, non-native people, white people, have towards native people, and that's why certain things are let go when something is inappropriately done, said, or laws or whatever they are, the policies, the practices, the behavior. There are certain behaviors that are allowed when it is native people that are being affected by the behavior. And I'll give you some examples. Obviously, I've talked about Andrew Cuomo's racist comments, the comments that he has made relating to the Senecas having a history of breaking agreements. Of course, anybody with any common sense knows that that's not true. They know that making a statement like that is not only false, but it's racist. I mean, if Andrew Cuomo had said something that Jews have a history of such and such, or blacks have a history of such, or if somebody said Italians have anybody who would qualify or quantify a certain, especially a negative characteristic around a specific group of people, that would be met with outrage. But I'll tell you, when he made those comments about Senecas, the newspaper reporters, the TV reporters, the radio reporters, they just glossed over it. They didn't call him out, and they said, "Governor, are you sure? Are you sure that's a statement you want to make? Are you suggesting that there's something inherently wrong with a Seneca that makes them incapable of being honest and true to their word?" Of course, they didn't hold him on that. And instead, he says that, and that comment lands, and then it's never addressed again. A friend of mine, in fact, Billy Cannella, a counselor on Seneca Nation, he had made a post on one of my Facebook during one of my shows, talked about a mural in Albany that depicts, again, they're going to characterize it as a battle amongst the native people, but you look at some of these things, and clearly they are slaughters. And the thing is, these kinds of murals exist all over the place. These kind of racist depictions of history, mischaracterizations of history, and even when they are kind of true to fact because they show an atrocity being committed, somehow, because it's America doing these things to native people, it is it seems like it's okay. You can have a mural like that in a state office building. I mean, you wouldn't have, some of the mass lynchings of black people that, not only from the slave era, but in the 100 years that would follow that slave era. You wouldn't have that depicted on the murals of a building inside a state office building, because it's outrageous. But it doesn't seem to be outrageous when you depict something that has some abuse, perpetrated against a native person. I mean, that's kind of what I'm talking about. So now let me get back to missing and murdered Indigenous women. This is a huge problem. This isn't an anomaly of behavior. For one thing, even referring to the domestic violence issues, 70% of the domestic violence perpetrated against Native women is done by non-Native men. And so if there's any question you have, well, why would that, isn't that being addressed? Well, the problem is most of the states won't provide adequate resources to police their people, their people, American citizens, in their interaction with Native people. That's how the murders of the Osage and so many of the bad behavior, so much of the bad behavior that has been perpetrated against Native people. It isn't because they don't say it's permitted by law, but it's permitted by practicality, because they won't provide the police resources. So when a Native woman turns up missing, who are you going to call? A state policeman? And again, I know there's two circumstances. There are the remote areas, or what white people call the remote areas, which are the Native territories, the quote unquote reservations. You're not going to get a state police officer to show up on Pine Ridge. And the problem is, even in Native territories that have some sort of police force, a tribal police force, or a Bureau of Indian Affairs, a tribal police or whatever else, Native courts can't prosecute crimes against Native people, not against non-Native people. So if a white man beats a Native woman, or worse, a tribal court can't convict him. Yeah, they did. I know somebody's going to say, but didn't they change that? No, they did a couple of pilot programs. I don't even know what the status of that is through their law protecting women. I'm drawing a blank right now, but they passed a law that is supposed to protect women from domestic violence, and this, and they did a pilot program for Native courts and Native police to try administering justice to non-Native people. But it's not widespread. And in fact, it's very, very select on which territories we're doing such a thing. So for the most part, if you commit a crime against a Native person, and you're non-native, you're pretty much going to get off scot-free. Because the tribal courts can't touch you, and the state courts or county courts or whatever else might be in the area, they don't have the resources, and nor does the federal government, and in terms of the FBI or anybody else. So this climate or this this unwritten policy or practice that allows the abuse of Native women continues. And this is true on both sides of the imaginary line across Turtle Island. So on the Canadian side, the U.S. side, it's true on both sides. On the Canadian side, at least they're getting an audience and they're addressing the conversation. I'm not saying it's being properly addressed, but at least there's a conversation. This isn't even a conversation on the U.S. side. I mean, it's not even a conversation. So all this brings me to Savannah Greywind. Savannah was a 22-year-old woman. She was 8 months pregnant, and she turned up missing. And then she was found. And when she was found, she was dead, wrapped in plastic and duct tape, and found in a river. And her baby was removed from her. They found the baby alive and well in a white couple in the apartment. Now, this isn't on the reservation, mind you. This is in North Fargo, North Dakota. And the couple who lives above her in the apartment building that she lived in had her baby. And of course, some of this stuff is not all completely ferreted out. This is a developing story. I had been, on Facebook. I saw many of the posts that were suggesting that Savannah Greywind was missing, and of course then she was found. Now, here, first off, let me say this right out of the gate. Her absence and her murder has been addressed by law enforcement. They have thrown resources at it. They threw, not only the police but detectives, and I heard any numbers in the range of 20 to 30 detectives they threw at this case. So this, unlike so many other cases of missing or murdered Indigenous women, did get some law enforcement attention, and part of it is because, unlike the ones that take place on a native territory or on an Indian reservation, this happened in a place where there was an adequate police force. And so this case did not get ignored by law enforcement. And that's not my point. My point is the culture that allows missing and murdered Indigenous women to continue, and for that to be continue a problem is what led to this. This isn't the Fargo police. It's not a fault of the Fargo police is my point. But it's a fault of societal allowance, so to speak. Now, this is an absolute, it's a heinous act. It's an incredible act. But here's again where I got to get back to the media. If you're hearing about this story for the first time from me, then you got to ask the question: well, why isn't this on the news? Now, it is on the news. It's in North Dakota, and it is being covered in the print press and that kind of stuff. But from a national standpoint, this isn't showing up in major newspapers. This isn't covered by Fox News or CNBC or CBS. None of these. I haven't heard the story. You probably have not heard the story. Unless you're native and following some of these native group pages, you probably don't know who Savannah Greywind is. You don't know what a beautiful young woman this was. You don't know that her boyfriend Ashton is devastated by this. You don't know that because you're not hearing the story. So I'm telling the story, and this is again in the same way that I say the media failed Standing Rock. The media is failing the Seneca Nation. When something happens and you refuse to cover it or refuse to cover it fairly, I got to go back to some of the stuff that Andrew Cuomo gets away with saying. When he says that, when he refuses to cite, the language in the gaming compact that's supposed to back up, secure his position on claiming he's going to get money out of the Senecas over this gaming revenue stuff. Yeah, I know he's been asked the question, but nobody says every news story should cite the governor's failure to cite any language that supports his position, but they don't. Instead, he gets to say racist things like the Senecas have a history of breaking agreements. So when I talk about Savannah Graywin, and you've never heard about this, I mean, if this was a white woman any place in the United States, in fact, I would argue if this was a white woman in England, yeah, it would have got some coverage. But because she's a Native woman, it isn't getting covered. This is what I consider that unique level of racism that, look, we're not being lynched. We're not being massacred. But we are still having our lives affected by this racism. We're still having everything from psychological damage to historical trauma, self-esteem issues, drug and alcohol, suicide rates, kids turning their back with no prospect for the future. This is all part of American policy. But it isn't just governmental policy, because you know what? If the media paid more attention to what was happening, if they gave Native people a fair shake, then you could affect change. If somebody bothers you to do a story on missing and murdered Indigenous women, and people had some sense for how vulnerable Native women are, Native girls are, because of the lack of resources that are made available, because of the lack of care, the absolute apathy that exists in the United States for the conditions by which Native people live under is incredible. And then some of the attitude, and this isn't just from white supremacists either. It says, well, let them move off the reservation. Let them. They should just assimilate. Get over it. That's what we hear all the time. And the sad part about it is, for many of our people, there are so few opportunities on Native territories that they have to abandon their families, their culture, their history, all that stuff they have to abandon, and they do have to. I mean, something like 70% of Native people don't live on Native territories. I mean, that's not because of choice. I mean, that has to do with survivability. And even when they do, we are such a marginalized people. I've talked about the numbers before. I had mentioned that the Native population is about 5 million people. When I made a closer look at this on census information, it's more like half that. And in fact, in one of the reports that I pulled up, it suggests that our population has diminished over the last 10 years. And again, I know some of these numbers are hard to completely rely on, but when you talk about a Native people, a people whose numbers were in the 30 to 50 to 60 to maybe even 100 million people on this continent prior to European contact, and now our numbers are below 3 million people, 2.5 million people, and frankly that number's up from 100 years ago. By some numbers and some estimates, I saw that our numbers were down to a couple 100,000 people left. I mean, so we've recovered some of our population, but when you consider that our population, this massive population of Indigenous people, has been wiped out by American policy and some European policy, it's not all in just the last 200 years. And we remain such a small number. And let me put it in perspective. We represent somewhere between 8 and 9%, 0.8 and 0.9% of the American population. So we're less than 1% of the American population. White people are 62%. Black people are around 13, 14%. And then you can, but everybody else's numbers, and it's hard when you're talking about Spanish people, because Spanish people, that's an ethnicity, it's not a race, but by some estimates that number is as high as 30%. But that could be, black Spanish people, brown Spanish people, whatever. Asian population's higher. There are more Haitians in the United States than there are First Nations people, Indigenous people, Native people. So, and I'm not just complaining about that number. I'm just saying you have to understand that because we are such a small number, this is why I say that we're not an important voting bloc. This is why I say we aren't we will never represent a constituency that garners any direct attention from any lawmaker. The only time any attention is ever granted toward or given towards Native people is when they want to do something like take our land or run a pipeline through it or do something like that. Or somebody wants to complain. They want to cut a budget. And they say, well, we need to cut that. We need to cut that Indian Health Service funding. We got to cut that BIA funding. And, of course, and I got to tell you, most of that money gets swallowed up in the bureaucracy. And who do you think populates that bureaucracy? It's not Native people. You know, I'm not saying the Native people don't work for the Bureau of Indian Affairs or Indian Health Service. But by and large, the six-figure incomes, yeah, that's all different. That's all white people. So, I mean, when you look at the attention that Native people get when to address the adversities of our community, yeah, Barack Obama made a historic visit to Standing Rock. Ironically, that historic visit was followed by a pipeline that got jammed down their throats. What a coincidence! Imagine who would have believed that. So yeah, you go there and you massage Native people. First time a sitting president in modern history visits Native territory and hugs babies and, you know, has American flags waved all over himself. And then, and lo and behold, there's a pipeline controversy that goes through the very place, Cannonball, you know, up in, just top side of Standing Rock. Now we don't get attention, even when a heinous crime like this. And I'm not even going to mention the white people who were found with it. I'm not going to give them the satisfaction of having their name roll off of my lips. And if this were an absolute unique circumstance, if this never happens and this is an anomaly, it's still newsworthy. The problem is it's not an anomaly. This is the kind of thing, and I'm not saying somebody having the baby cut out of their womb is a normal behavior for conduct for a person to to commit themselves, or it's not a normal thing to happen to anybody. But again, this kind of thing of women being killed, and of course the immediate thing police do for the most part anytime, especially a Native woman dies, whether they're hit by a train or fall from a building, oh, it must have been suicide. Look, missing and murdered Indigenous women is a disgrace. It's a U.S., it's an American, it's a Canadian disgrace because it's allowed to happen. And I'm not trying to single out the fault of any police department or a specific act of state or federal government that led to the death of Savannah Greywind. But it is the atmosphere, it is the policy, it is the general prevailing attitude towards Native people, and that's why these things can happen. Those are the conditions that allow this level of depravity to take place, and this level of again, the idea that you could dehumanize a people to the point that you can not just murder them, but commit a heinous act like that. Now I don't know what their intention was with the child. And again, I'm grateful to the police work that led to the recovery of the child and that kind of thing. There were once this woman, turned up missing and had this grave thing happen to her, there probably wasn't a lot to do to help Savannah. But I'm hoping this, and I'm going to follow the story. So I mean, I know that they're doing some crowdsourced funding to help the child and this young father as well. And as I have more information on that, and I can kind of determine what are the what's out there that's going to provide this direct fund. I'll talk about it not only in the show, but I'll post the links on my Facebook group page, and so people can help. And look, I understand a hurricane hit Houston. Yeah, I understand, historic damage and that kind of stuff. I mean, problems with chemical plants blowing up and, all kinds of, I understand that there's other issues in the news cycle. But you know what? In Europe, they covered this story. In Great Britain, they covered this story. But not in the national newspapers in the United States, not on national television. I didn't hear about this on NPR. Maybe it's been on there, and I just haven't heard it. But when a truly heinous act is committed against a human being, the first and foremost thing we need to do is have clear condemnation of something like this. And granted, the media around North Dakota and across Indian country is covering this. But there is a certain level of complicity that goes along with the failure of federal law enforcement, the failure of politicians to weigh in on this stuff, and the failure of the media in covering this. So I wanted to cover this. I've kind of quietly watched this thing without, and I'll admit I didn't, this hasn't had my undivided attention until recently, until the later developments of this thing. But blown away. I'm just blown away, and and this isn't the only person that this kind of thing happens to. And and that's why when I say that missing and murdered Indigenous women, that it's a problem. And it's a problem. This isn't just we talk about what they call the highway of tears. It's all over. We've seen the abuses in eastern Canada, northern Canada. We see it in every obviously out west. We see this. It's a pervasive thing that's occurring. And again, the likelihood of having something terrible happen to you if you're a Native woman is sometimes 5-10 times greater if you're a Native woman than if you were anybody else. I'll tell you, if one thing comes out of this Savannah Greywind story, is I'm hoping that enough attention is generated from this, not only to support her baby, but to support a stronger and more just a better look at the problem in general. Because this isn't a breakdown of Native culture that happens all by itself. I'm not saying that's not a component of it, but even that is something that's driven by American policy, by Canadian policy. So I did, I had to bring this up. I wanted to mention it, and it's an important story, and I'm going to stay on it. So, all right, we're at the bottom of the hour. We'll take a break here and come back after this.
Back in Spain 500 years ago. Oh, Chris,
pretty crazy story, huh?
Told Isabella that the world was round. She thought he'd flipped his lid. He bugged the queen so much she finally said, okay, I'll give you 3 ships and some men. He said, I'll find a brand new route to India. Queenie, I'll soon be home again. In 1492, Buffalo. 1492, Buffalo. Welcome all your tired and weary travelers. And old Chris gave out new names. But this ain't India, we are not Indians. To this day it's still the same. 1492. Pinta Santa Maria cross. Said he was a hero for finding the new world. How can you find what wasn't our law? 1492. Who found who?
All right, thanks for coming back. Yeah, that's Murray Porter in 1492, Who Found Who. We're going to talk a little bit about that, too, here. But first, let me acknowledge our sponsors. I want to thank Ross and Holly John and the RJE family of businesses. Eric White in ERW Enterprises, individuals like my good friend who sat in for us all summer long and returned to California, Ed Schindler, friends like Tracy Brown, Cynthia Trice, Scott Snyder, Neville Spring, Sugar Montour, and of course many others who have helped the show in the past. Especially when we were on commercial radio and we had very expensive paid programming bills. We got through all that time, and we've run this show consistently. We're in our 8th year, and that's only possible because of the support of people who listen to the show, support of people who feel strongly about having a native voice on so many of these issues. And of course, I also want to thank Unity Stream and Apache Radio Net for providing our streaming. I also want to thank CKWE for the simulcast and rebroadcast, as well as Netroots Radio, Real People's Media, Indigenous Resistance Radio, and all of you who share the show and share not just this show, but share my show from New York, my Let's Talk show in New York City. I appreciate all of you sharing it, not only on your pages and your group pages, but those of you who send it out in tweets and again shares on Facebook. I appreciate it all. Look, I played the Columbus the Who Found Who song for a reason. There's a lot of debate raging about statues, and some of this stuff kind of got born out of the white supremacists who converged on Charlottesville. Part of their justification for selecting Charlottesville as a place to do their white supremacist rally was the fact that they were removing a statue of Robert E. Lee from a park, and of course this now has expanded into not only new conversations, but old conversations about statues like Christopher Columbus. We have one in Buffalo, just off of Niagara Street, a park called Columbus Park, and it's had paint thrown on it. It's had some labels painted onto it, like rapists and slaver and other things, and although it's called vandalism, it's also true. And this is part of the problem with this idea of hero worship in the way that Americans the way, well, not just Americans. I mean, because this idea of building statues and monuments to people is something that goes back to Europe and Greece and Rome and all of that other stuff. But part of the reason when people say, yeah, but these statues have been there for so long. Yeah, but they were improperly represent history. When you build a monument to Christopher Columbus, you're obviously praising his accomplishments without understanding what those accomplishments are. I mean, as a child in school, you're taught things about, Columbus proved the world wasn't flat. Well, that wasn't really true. I mean, wasn't true at all. And that he discovered America. Well, how do you discover a continent that had a very, very, very large population on it? And a population that was, had been, with civilizations that had been developing for thousands and thousands of years. Of course, he didn't discover. I mean, it might have been new to him, but you know what? He didn't really even ever make landfall to the major continents, North or South America, or even Central America. He just hit a couple of islands. And how did he come to make this voyage? Well, he was trying to get rich. This was a speculative voyage. This was an attempt for him to come up with a faster route to make money. Ironic that we're talking about 1492, and there is an attempt to advance capitalism, even way back then. So the whole idea that he was going to try to find a faster and more economical route to India. Now, think about what an utter failure that is in what actually happened. He miscalculated getting to India by going by sailing east and south, by 2 oceans, by the Pacific Ocean and half of the Indian Ocean. He also miscalculated by an entire continent. South America was in the way, which he never even got to. He only got as far as a couple of small islands in the overall scheme of things. And then immediately went about trying to figure out, well, how do we exploit this? How do we turn this into money making? So his attempt at what he was trying to do was an absolute utter failure. But he let no failure not reap rewards, right? So he initiated a part of a sex slave trade by grabbing young native girls. He exploited whatever wealth he could find. Everything from plants and feathers and flowers, but mostly gold. That's what he wanted. He wanted the most valuable thing that a white man could possibly have, which was gold. And once he realized that there was some gold, not lots of it, once he realized there was some gold, he again, in a world before dollar signs, that's exactly what would have been in his eyes. So he would actually enslave all of the native people that he came into contact with, put them into a specific service, and that service was get me gold. And if they didn't get him gold, he would dismember, disfigure, kill, literally murder a native people for failing to pay him tribute. That's what he called it. They had a tribute system where they had to go out and somehow come up with gold. And if they didn't, they were killed. And even obviously this, if you said, okay, you didn't give me gold, put your hand out and cut your hand off, that person was going to bleed to death. But more importantly, that person was going to go amongst his people or her people, showing this unbelievable atrocity that was just committed to them. And that was to send a signal. Then the rest of you better find gold, or you're going to have your limbs removed, or you're going to have your ear cut off, or your nose. We are going to make sure that those who are not producing are either dead or disfigured. That's the Christopher Columbus. That's the one on the monument. That's the one at Columbus Park and off of Niagara Street in Buffalo. That's the one in the center of Columbus Circle. So the fact that people are complaining about this stuff is not anything new. And really, I think because people have become more aware of not just the atrocities that these civil war veterans perpetrated, and again, I can't downplay the travesty that was that would unfold with the Civil War. I mean, with Robert E. Lee commanding the Confederate Army under the president of the Confederate States of America, Jefferson Davis, and the 13 governors of those southern states, they not only committed an act of treason against the United States by trying to separate. They committed that act of treason, but they actually waged war, and that war would result in the deaths of over 500,000 people. I mean, 660,000 people by most estimates. That's the number that I've come up with. Were killed in that war. I mean, it's incredible. It would take all of the United States' other military conflicts after the Civil War, all of the other military conflicts combined through most of the Vietnam War, to have as many deaths, American deaths, as those that died in the Civil War. And yet you're going to put a statue, you're going to name a park and a highway or a school after Robert E. Lee, and put his figure in front of, and then make sure that you put it right where black people are going to have to see that all the time, knowing that this whole secession. Oh yeah, no, it's about states' rights. Yeah, states' rights to do what? States' rights to have slavery. Was the war fought exclusively over slavery? No, but predominantly over slavery. And there's no question about that. And I just saw something recent. Let me see if I can find it here. There was, there's always this debate. Well, is the Confederate flag a racist symbol? Well, this is from the guy who actually designed the Confederate flag. As a people, we are fighting to maintain a heaven-ordained supremacy of white man over the inferior colored race. As a national emblem, the Confederate flag, is significant in our higher cause and the cause of a superior race. That's by William Thompson. He's the guy who designed. So he designed the flag to be a racist symbol. So all you guys, and I live on the Cattaraugus territory of Sanger Nation. So when I drive off territory, and I've never seen one flown on the territory. Maybe there's one that I don't know about. But when I drive through the little village of Gowanda or North Collins or Silver Creek, there are people that have this flag flying on the front porch. Now, why? Who knows? Who knows why somebody in Western New York is flying this rebel flag? Is it because they're rebels? What are they rebelling against? That's what I'd like to know. Or are they just racist? And and of course, I've talked the last couple of weeks about racism and about what it means. And this continues to be a problem. It continues to be a problem that that people just don't understand what racism actually means. And I'll say it one more time: racism has two major components to it. Racism is this belief that one race is superior over another. And in the United States, that superior race, and I know this because it's been said for 150 years of U.S. presence and all of the European presence before that white men are the superior race. Obviously, this guy, what did I say his name was? William Thompson, believed that they were superior. Teddy Roosevelt, Theodore Roosevelt, he was a white supremacist. Now, I'm not saying this because to insult him. That's just who he was. I mean, this is the language. These are the things that he said. Presidents, like I said, and I've said this before, I said it last week, but the presidents right up to the mid 20th century were all it rolled off their tongues very easily about the racial superiority of white men. And somebody called into my show in New York, and they said that one of the first times that the word racism was in print and was talked about was Pratt, Richard Henry Pratt, I think it is. Richard. Now, if you don't know if the name Pratt rings a bell, but you can't quite place it, especially talking about racism. Pratt is the guy. Colonel Pratt, you might have known him by. Colonel Pratt is the guy who coined the phrase "kill the Indian, save the man." Now, and this is how twisted this is, because he thought that it was terrible that Native people were treated poorly. When he was talking about racism, he was talking about racism towards black people. He was talking about racism towards Native people. But his solution to the problem, how to solve racism, make Indians white. Make them white men. Assimilate them. Turn them into white men. And so the solution isn't, the solution wasn't do away with the racism. Just make everybody conform to whiteness. Of course, that was going to be even harder for black people than it was for Native people. I'm not saying that some people didn't pull it off, Ben Carson. It doesn't matter how black you are, you're pretty much conform with the white guys. And you see it. I mean, this Colin Kaepernick debate. When you hear the Charles Barkleys and the George Foremans, and you hear these guys weighing in, oh no, we just need to salute the flag. We shouldn't stand up against that Black Lives Matter thing. No, we shouldn't do that. Colin Kaepernick should just behave. He should be a good boy. I said the word boy. I wasn't going to use the other word, but that's essentially what they're saying. I'm glad. I posted a link today. Aaron Rodgers, quarterback for the Green Bay Packers, actually came out and said, "Look, I stand and salute the flag, but I absolutely respect what Colin Kaepernick does. And anybody who believes that Colin Kaepernick isn't playing football because of his ability, they're wrong." Now, this is a fellow quarterback. This guy's going to be a Hall of Famer one day, and he's saying Colin Kaepernick can play football, and there's no question why he's not. He's not because of racist attitudes. Now that's a white quarterback saying that, who who, while he isn't going to participate in that sign of protest by kneeling or whatever, and one of the Bills players yesterday during the national anthem stood up and put his fist up in the air. Yeah, I know, that's that Black Panther thing. Yeah, he, rather than putting his hand on his heart, he put his fist up in the air. And people started losing their minds. When I wrote that meme, a week and a half ago, actually, I guess it'd be a little over a week ago, and I said racism isn't a right thing, it's a white thing. Man, every white person on my, no, I take it back. Many of the white people on my group page and on my friends list, took offense to it. And not just white people, many Native people said, no, that sounds racist. I said, well, then you don't understand what the word means. But because, again, racism is about superiority. Racism, so if I don't like, and this isn't the case, but if I don't like white people, that's not racist. What's racist if you say, I'm superior to white people because I'm Native. That's racism. And of course, no people of color say that. There are plenty of people of color who are angry. Some are hateful, certainly spiteful towards the dominant, to the majority race. And again, these white supremacists are so concerned about becoming a minority. Let's clear that up. Right now, white people still represent 62% of the population, and it is entirely possible within a decade that their number may drop below 50% of the population. But make no mistake about it, they are still going to be the largest group of people in the United States. Almost double anybody else by race. Ethnicity, it might be a little closer, but by race, white people are still going to be twice the size. Black people only represent 13%. And of course, all people of color, their populations are rising, except for Native people, it appears. But they're never going to be a small minority in the United States. The likelihood of that happening is almost nil. But they may fall below that majority threshold of 50+%. So all that threat and fear. But here's what being in the majority and being in the positions of wealth and power and all that other stuff get you. They get you the other part of what racism is about. Racism is a systemic issue. That means the systems support this notion of superiority. The fact that only one black president has been elected. Not 13%, no, of all presidents have been are black. No, just one out of 45. If you look at the makeup of Congress, it isn't broken down along racial lines. But if you look at the prison population, guess what? That's not broken down along racial lines either. It is populated with black people. And it's not because black people commit more crimes than white people. They just serve more time than white people. So when Colin Kaepernick is standing up, or sitting down, or kneeling down, or if players are putting their fists in the air during the national anthem, what they're saying is, look, there is no justice for all. This liberty and justice for all. It's nice words, and we should strive for that, and Americans should strive for that. In fact, all human beings should strive for that. But to say those words as if that's been accomplished is simply not true. And that's why Colin Kaepernick is taking the position he has. So, I mean, and there are people who just think, oh, Colin Kaepernick is a crybaby. He did something and it cost his job, and now he's begging for a job back. No, he's not. Colin Kaepernick is doing work. I mean, he's doing stuff. I mean, he's made commitments to donate money to worthy causes, including, even foreign causes, sending, food and aid to Somalia. I didn't know this until again, another link that I posted. But Colin Kaepernick actually donated $50,000 to the Standing Rock Health Center, to the clinic. I didn't know that. That's not why I agree with the position he's taken. But there you go. Any of you Native people who thinking Colin Kaepernick is this selfish, greedy person, look, he's made lots of money playing football. And he's a decent football player. Is he, one of the top 5 players in the NFL? No, probably not anymore. But we'll never know because he's still in enough of his prime that he still may have had better times ahead. But we'll probably never know. And there is a call to boycott the NFL, and I'm not going to go to an NFL game. I probably won't watch one, and I won't watch one on television. But I am watching to see how many players are either standing with their fist in the air or taking a knee. And white players are doing it too. And like I said, Aaron Rodgers may not be doing the same kind of protest, but he made it very clear that Colin Kaepernick is being blackballed. And that's, again, that's a high-profile football player saying that, white football player saying that. So, I mean, and there's a connection here. There's a connection to all of this between Charlottesville and the statue issue. The Columbus statues issue. And again, one of the other things I got to mention is, again, a caller last week mentioned the statue in front of the Museum of Natural History. I mentioned it on the last program that I went up and saw it. One of my listeners who saw that I posted, I was going to go check it out, met me there. Older woman, 70 something years old. She went there and she said something to me that kind of struck me. She said, I've lived in this area right near this museum, for many, many years. Come to the museum many, many times. In fact, she has one of those cards, a membership. So she actually took me to the museum. But she says, I got to tell you something. I got to confess. I never noticed the black man and the native man in the Theodore Roosevelt statue. So let me clear it up for you. Theodore Roosevelt, looking all regal and dignified on a horse with a sidearm, with a pistol on his side, and looking for all the world like the Alexander the Great. And beside him, on his right, is a native person with no clothes on, just with a blanket over him and a full headdress. Now, keep in mind, this is he was a president during, like 1910, somewhere in that neighborhood, just after the turn of the century, but the 20th century. So there's a native person on one side of him, on the ground beneath him, and on the other side, on his left, is a black man, almost completely naked, just not showing his genitalia. He's standing there, barefoot, naked, just with one piece of material that is kind of waving over his over his genitalia. Now, why on earth would there be a naked black man and a partially naked native person standing beneath Teddy Roosevelt on a horse in the 20th century? I mean, it's not like native people weren't wearing clothing, or that black people, weren't. I mean, slavery was done, right? For 50 years, it was done. Yet that's the depiction. So that was what a caller told me about. Went and checked it out, and again, this woman said, "I never noticed it." So there's something really strange about that, and I thought, well, that's got to be an anomaly. I talked to somebody else at my station in New York, older white gentleman. And he said, "You know what? I never noticed there was a black man or a native person in that sculpture either." So now I'm thinking, this is a pattern. This isn't an anomaly anymore. Is it possible that white people see things completely different than people of color? Because I guarantee you, every black child who had to line up in the third grade to go to a field trip to the Museum of Natural History in New York City saw the naked black man there. And what do you think they saw when they saw this regal figure on a horse, and beneath him a naked black man? That's why these things are racist. Sorry, folks. There's no other. That's the system, right? The fact that we'll depict people that way. The fact that we can put native people being butchered on a mural in a state office building. The fact that we can prop up these statues that promote white supremacy all over the country. That's the problem. And that's why we talk about it here. Look, I want to thank everybody for listening, for being a part of the program. Again, I'm running the board here. Matt's been off for a few weeks, and so I'm not as good at following the Facebook comments, and I hope you did comment. I will address them after the show. I appreciate all of you who not only catch the show, the audio of the show streaming on www.ltnradionet.com, but also those of you who are following it on our Facebook live stream. It is one of the ways that I'm trying to get this out to you. And there's a reason. There's a reason I posted the meme. Racism isn't a right thing, it's a white thing. It's to start the conversation. It's to have the conversation. If you're not having a conversation about what it is, if you're bothered by Colin Kaepernick, then maybe we need to have a discussion. And I am having those discussions on Facebook all the time, even with family members. So again, I appreciate you listening. I appreciate you picking up this conversation, and I hope that you're having this conversation. And I hope the conversation isn't just divisive. The real hope is that in having this conversation, that some minds, not all minds, but some minds will be changed. Maybe some eyes will be open. Maybe some hearts will be open. Certainly our hearts should be open to Savannah Graywind and her baby girl. Thanks for listening, and we'll be back on Monday. Yahweh.
Now you say